Donald Trump is an authoritarian who's going to cancel elections if he wins the presidency. Unless his Supreme Court appointees do it first. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, I love it when I get to watch a narrative being established in the mainstream media. These things just, they spring up like mushrooms on the forest floor after a rainstorm, just everywhere. And the latest, there are actually two of them. One is in full sprout. The other, I think, is just bubbling up as of this morning. And we're recording this on Tuesday, December 5th. And the first one is this new use of the word authoritarian. And my friend and colleague Stephen Cruiser noticed this on Monday. I wrote a column about it over at PJ Media on Monday night. And he writes that in recent days, authoritarian has been popping up more and more in scary stories about Trump. By Monday morning, it was easy to spot in 3 of the first 4 MSM items I merely glanced at, and it was heavily implied in the 4th one. And the Washington Post story used authoritarian in the headline, and then said Trump's speech on Saturday, which I don't watch. Trump's speech on Saturday was an effort to turn the tables on rising alarms from Democrats and some Republicans. So, it's bipartisan scariness that Trump's return to power would imperil free elections and civil liberties. And I'll just give you one more of the stories. This one, of course, was from the New York Times, which is, that's just the fertile ground for lefty narrative growing. Said Mr. Trump's violent and authoritarian rhetoric on the 2024 campaign trail has attracted growing alarm and comparisons to historical fascist dictators, Mr. Hilter, and contemporary populist strongmen. Bill, let's go to you on this one. It's amazing, even though they supposedly shut down the Journo list a decade or more ago, where journalists used to go in their little Google Groups thing and plot out the next day's narrative. It's amazing, even though the journalist is dead and buried, that everybody seems to get on the same bandwagon right around the same time, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think that, I think there's one thing that both sides can agree on, and that is nobody's going to call Joe Biden a strong man. I think that's a relief for all of us. Which, by the way, reminds me of a sentence that PJ O'Rourke wrote. It's one of the reasons I became a conservative. He was asked, he was constantly asked, "What's it feel like to be called a Nazi all the time?" And PJ said, I don't let it bother me anymore. And the reason I don't let it bother me is because never once in the history of the world has a woman ever fantasized about being ravaged by a man dressed as a liberal. and that's kind of where you need to go with these kind of outrageous slanders, is you just kind of have to really just own them. Unfortunately for the mainstream media, this is not going to be Donald Trump's first presidency should he win the presidency in 2024. So we can, of course, remember all of the internment camps and the forced labor exchanges, the lobotomies, and all of the other atrocities committed against the American people during his first term as president. And honestly, Steve, I really think that these people are. I think the thing about Donald Trump is he is so far outside of any experience that they've ever had that they simply don't know what to do with him. They don't understand that the more they try to demonize him, the more reasonable he seems. I mean, I don't really know how else to put it. When you have a former president who was in office for 4 years and whom I might point out didn't get us involved in any foreign wars, had a booming economy, record employment for blacks and Hispanics and all the rest of it.
Oh, yeah.
You can say this kind of thing, if Trump ever gets elected, this is what he'll do, and you might be able to scare some people that way. But once you've got a guy who's actually been in the White House, this whole business about, the camps are coming and here comes the authoritarianism and here comes the strong man and all the rest of it. Donald Trump, of course, being a conservative, or at least a Republican conservative, or whatever the hell that means anymore, he's in favor of many of these totalitarian, authoritarian, strongman ideas like a fully armed population, smaller government, less government regulation, reduction of the police state, holding the federal police agencies and intelligence agencies to independent review by elected officials, all the rest of that stuff that constitutes your general fascist, strongman, banana republic, tyrant. So I don't know really what to say about it other than the fact that keep going, keep going. I hope you keep ratcheting up this rhetoric And I hope you really start shrieking about re-education camps and people disappearing into the desert and black helicopters, all the rest of this stuff. It's an indication they just don't know how to fight this guy. And the reason they don't know how to fight him is because if you look, you certainly can't fight him on his record as president. They keep thinking somehow. Here's the thing, just to wrap it up, Steve. I've watched this for 5-6 years now. Progressives think that if they can just break one more piece of news that's unflattering about Donald Trump, his support will collapse. As if those of us out there who support Donald Trump are completely unaware of the fact that he tends to be a little narcissistic, a little bit grand. He's got a bit of a mouth. He's a little thin-skinned on things. This is shocking news. If only his supporters could find out that this is what Donald Trump is really like. We know what Donald Trump is really like. And we know there are many things about Donald Trump that are not appealing. But the thing that's most appealing about Donald Trump is he's not one of you. And that's what his appeal is. And that's why they keep making him stronger every time they do one of these so-called tactics.
Yeah, the last batch of polls I just saw had him up 6 nationally against Biden, and Biden's support is cratered to 38. And, it's really difficult for a president's support to go much below 40 because that's your bedrock party support there, and 38 is not good. Scott, maybe it's because I read Stephen Cruiser's column on Monday night. He warned me during the day that it was going to be coming up. That this morning when I got to work, that my antenna were just a little too finely attuned to this, but. Regardless, I did notice another one of these memes, maybe one and a half of these narratives popping up on Tuesday morning, and that is the Moore versus the United States tax case that's going to the Supreme Court this week. And I don't know if you're familiar with the details, but it's kind of complicated. But the Supreme Court could, through this case, maybe kind of pre-nullify the idea of establishing a wealth tax, which is a pretty radical idea. The one that Pocahontas wants to do and hasn't been able to get anywhere through a Democratic Senate. So the Democrats really want to get this thing ratified by the Supreme Court so that they can go ahead and tax your IRA and your 401k and all the rest. Oh, they say they'll only tax the super rich, but they said that about the IRS a century ago too. So we know how that works. Anyway, so the first one I noticed was in Politico, where they ran an op-ed that warned that 3 justices appointed by Donald Trump. I mean, ooh, right? It's like see Freddy Krueger there. Confront a moment of truth on Tuesday with a case that not only threatens our tax system, but our democracy.
Well, it threatens our tax system? What? Say that again?
I know, right? You had me a tax system. And then USA Today. I mean, I got my column published this morning, and then I had to do an update on it like 20 minutes after I published it. This USA Today column came up that said the Supreme Court's decision could have sweeping implications for how much the government can dip into the earnings of wealthy Americans who can shield those holdings from taxes. So we've got this theme that the Supreme Court is corrupt because Donald Trump put 3 justices on there. And we also have this theme that the wealth tax, which has never been done in this country and is a pretty radical idea that Pocahontas can't get through a Democrat-controlled Senate, is somehow wealthy Americans shielding their holdings. Again, Scott, I'll present you with the same question. Isn't it amazing how these narratives just seem to bubble up from nowhere?
Once again, paging Mr. Hilter, Mr. Adolf Hilter. It's, when you say when a headline says growing alarm, I always think, well, where is like the growing alarm clock? Is there somewhere where there's a constant measure of how alarmed people are about things? It was like we talked about a couple of weeks ago when the guy got somewhat libertarian guy got elected in Argentina, and the headline said Argentinians bracing themselves
Brace yourself.
for the guy who just won 56% of the vote. And so,
That was a fun one.
it would be more journalistic of them if they actually based what they were saying not on their interpretation of the news, but on the facts of the news. And I'm not saying that there aren't some people who are experiencing growing alarm at Adolf Hilter's capabilities, but it's they try to make it sound like it's some sort of sweeping zeitgeist that's rolling across the plains like a dust storm, just enveloping everything, and there's no there. I'm listening to a book that I think I've read twice. I've read it at least once in hardcover, and then I think I've listened to it before. Now I'm listening to it again. Gordon S. Wood wrote a book called The Creation of the American Republic. And it's interesting because now we associate this idea of a wealth tax simply with the Democratic Party. However, there were a lot of people who called themselves Republicans, a word that did not mean political party at that time, who were really concerned about the corruption that luxurious living brings to a people. And because their example had been Great Britain and in the states of Europe and the monarchies there and the courtiers and all that kind of stuff. And they were very concerned in the early days of the American experiment, so to speak, really before the revolution and then after it too, that we would become like them, that we would become these people who were just, soaking in luxury, and it would corrupt our morals, and therefore we would not be able to govern ourselves because we were all corrupted. This led to ideas like sumptuary laws and ways of taxing wealth so that there was more of a leveling. So this is not necessarily a new idea, and it didn't spring up then either. For many, many years, people have believed that somehow there are two delusions here. One is if you take the money away from the rich people and give it to the government, life gets better for everybody. And two is if you give money to poor people, then they will no longer be poor people. But the old saying goes that if you just kind of leveled everybody at the same income this year and said, okay, everybody's going to make $25,000 a year. In 5 years, most of the people who are rich now would be rich again, and most of the people who are poor now would be poor again. It's not about money. Money is just a measure. It's a measure of your understanding of the activity that it takes to generate money. It's a measure of your industry. It's a measure of your creativity. It's a measure of your willingness to take risk. It's a measure of your willingness to endure potential poverty, like devastating poverty in the creation of that business or of that wealth. And so, I am not experiencing growing alarm about Mr. Hilter or anybody else. And I think that, anytime they do a story like that, they think they're winning converts. All they are is doing is continuing to delude the supporters of their way and just stealing the resolve of the people who oppose them.
I want to add one thing, Steve, because a little data point came up to me. During the 2016 debate, there was a memorable moment when Hillary Clinton accused Donald Trump of something or other, and Donald Trump talked about some of her admittedly felonious acts, and he said, yeah, because you'd be in jail. And that's all the lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. Well, I noticed that after 4 years of a Donald Trump presidency, there's no mugshot of Hillary Clinton, but there is a mugshot of Donald Trump after 4 years of a Biden presidency. Yeah. So we ought to be carefully looking at who's using the political muscle of the state in order to turn this country into a banana republic.
Yeah, the left projects always. They have to. What's curious, what really grabbed my attention, I guess, and maybe I need to write a column about this too, is that the left's attacks on the Supreme Court, on the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, have been increasing, and it really started with Robert Bork 30 some odd years ago now, but it's been increasing since Trump's term, not just because of, Orange Man bad, but because of the 6-3 majority that Trump's appointments allowed, which resulted in things like overturning Roe versus Wade. And suddenly the Supreme Court, which the left had always loved, because as Bill has pointed out on previous episodes, that was the only way they could really get their will done, was by judicial fiat. And so the idea of a conservative Supreme Court is just anathema to them, and they've been going after Clarence Thomas. That USA Today story I quoted called into question Justice Samuel Alito's ability to fairly adjudicate on this issue. And this is part of a process that I've noticed. So I'm gonna tell you a nice little rule of mine, a little rule of thumb, and you can apply this to wherever you think the narrative might be going next. Any institution that the left can't control, they will try to destroy. And if they can't destroy it, they will try to smear it and discredit it. So if you can just keep that rule in mind, you'll have a pretty good idea of what's coming next. And, well, it's good to be armed, even if sometimes the ammunition is intellectual. And that is your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.